Hello, and welcome to the live Q&A for Are We Alone, a showcase of experimental short films. My name is Arzhang Zafar. I am one of the program directors at PATH, and with me are some very talented filmmakers who can now introduce themselves. I don't know what order we want to go in, but I guess Appa, you're next to me, so you can go, and then we can go from there.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Appa. I'm the writer and director of We Kept Warm. We Kept Warm is a film that we shot last year in the middle of lockdown, sort of inspired by having to grapple with the immense grief of the pandemic.
Paulo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paulo. I'm the director of Night and Day. My film I actually shot end of 2019 going into 2020, so around the holidays, and then I edited throughout the entire pandemic. But the film is actually kind of a family portrait set in my living room pre-lockdown, and just kind of documenting the ambience of it, of my siblings, my parents, individual family members during the holiday, and then kind of cutting it up with some musical overtones. So even though it was very much a pre-pandemic film, the themes of the intimacy and kind of just like the single location really ended up melding well into the current situation.
Hi, I'm Ryan Miller. I was the cinematographer for In Loving Memory, and I'll let Vicky, the director, introduce the movie.
Thanks. My name is Vicky Lee. I'm the writer and director of In Loving Memory of Who We Used to Be. Similar to Appa, I made this film during the pandemic, and the experimental short doc is about a reflection of myself and how I'm trying to unpack the person I used to be and the distance I feel from her now.
Great. So you all touched on this, I guess, a little bit in your intros, but before we get into sort of the more in-depth stuff, let's just talk a little bit about sort of how these projects were conceived and how they ended up coming together. And we can, I guess, go in the same sort of order.
I always answer first. Okay, all right. I appreciate.
Oh, we'll switch it up,
pressure.
but for
No,
now,
it's fine.
let's just
It's
do
fine.
that. Yeah.
I don't mind. But We Kept Warm was a film I wrote, I guess around September or October, after a few months of lockdown, and I think as a creative person, I really value being trying to develop lucidity of like my emotional state. And for the first few months of the pandemic, it was just this immense fog. Like, I don't know how to talk about where I am. I don't know how to talk about where the world is. Like, the world feels like it's falling apart around me. I feel so isolated. And it was sort of a way to, and I think one big factor was this grief, not just partly for the people that we've lost, but also, I guess, the lives that we ourselves lost. And What I had to do was sort of turn it into a game with grief and sort of break apart the language and remake the language around grief to make the film and to sort of like figure out where I was mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, and I guess for me, around for Night and Day, around 2016 to 2018 to actually 2019, I was very much in the narrative film realm. I was developing my third feature length script, and very much in that zone. I was based in New York for 10 years before that. Then I moved here to Manila, and I was developing this indie feature, and which included a short version of it. And um, I kind of wanted to uh, give myself a bit of space from all that, and kind of return to like my original creative form, because at that point you're working with a lot of producers. You're really like starting to go down the process, um, and I reminded myself that, as with many of us, I kind of got my start in documentary, and I hadn't done that in a while, and I also hadn't done a film wherein, um, again, going back to like how we probably all started, not just with these projects, but how you probably got into filmmaking. You were, uh, you were the editor, director, whatever. So I hadn't been in that kind of like isolated zone in a while. So this was kind of, it was like a self-imposed experiment. Again, it was like a lockdown of a film that before the pandemic even hit, where I wanted to challenge myself, and didn't really have a script to work with. And yeah, it took, as I mentioned, it took me basically a whole year in post production to finally like make sense of all of it. That's where all the real work came in.
I kind of had the similar journey as Paulo. I had the idea during the pandemic, and I didn't really know how to make of all the storylines until I got into post, which was a little bit of a headache. But I think it was kind of that process of having to sift through all your emotions and all your understandings in order to get to where you are. And one thing that I was always interested in was just digging into my family photos and all the stuff that we have lying around the house. And I thought I could probably make something of it and just try to go through um, these moments of our history as a family or as individuals. So it was a little bit of a thought experiment to try to piece everything together.
And I was brought on a project. Me and Vicky were actually working on another film together. And because of the pandemic, it was canceled. So we had probably put in like 100 man hours into that short film. So like when we kind of switched it up, I feel like there was like a lot of emotions going in having already invested so much in another project, and then because of the pandemic, switching up what we were doing. And I guess that was like the fruition of the project itself was trying to find a way to still be a filmmaker but not be able to do it around people. That's kind of where I think a lot of the inspiration for the format for the project came from. The pandemic kind of spawned like this necessity to have to create while not having the typical support from our schools as well. So I think like the combination of those two things, plus Vicky also got started in doc as well, I think. So the combination of that, I think, goes along with what Paulo and Vicky were saying a lot.
Yeah, I imagine we're going to be hearing a lot of similar stories from filmmakers over the course of this. But I guess now we can kind of move on to sort of more individualized questions, and then from there transition to stuff that's a little bit broader. But since we left off with you, Ryan, I'm curious, given that In Loving Memory is such a like it contains such a variety of styles and ways of kind of approaching film. I'm curious about how your role as cinematographer sort of fit in there. Like, what was your role basically? I mean, it's on the one hand, we know what a cinematographer does, but like in this context, I'm very interested to know.
So I had never done a non-live action film. And this is actually predominantly non-live action. So a lot of it was actually, I would say a lot of that it was Vicky. But we would we just did a lot of pre-production where we planned and we talked about the kinds of things that we would like to see in it. And then she scrapbooks a lot. So that's actually really helpful. Between that and her ability to explain animation without the animation actually being there, where she would like do hand signs and she'd be making the noises for things and things like that. So that helped a lot to show what the mood would be like. So we could like find out a color scheme and things like that. Not necessarily setting the picture, since so much of it wasn't live action, but coming up with color scheme, theme, kind of the mise-en-scène of what you'd be seeing and how that as you referenced before, how that would all connect to each other was pretty difficult because we just had like so many ideas and there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah, adding on to Ryan, I think one thing that he did really helpful was try to corral all my ideas. So there was a lot of mediums that we use and just trying to understand how to bring, still images to life in a different way through animation or stop motion. And that's also something that my animator did, Anna. And in terms of like the broader scheme, I think one thing that was really interesting about this project is I've never done a personal piece like this before. Neither have I done anything that wasn't live action. So it was a lot of figuring out how to use, After Effects or using different programs to use stop motion and also using new equipment that I haven't ever used. So it was a lot of trial and error that was a little bit of a pain, but also the fun part of just trying to understand how to better capture the story.
So there's a lot of firsts, it sounds like, for you two, both of you, which is super impressive given what we see in the final product. But I'll add another question for Vicky, which is obviously this short incorporates a lot of archival stuff like home movies. Can you tell us a little bit about your sort of process for, first of all, like figuring out what you wanted to use in terms of that stuff, and like your process for like finding it and like, I don't know, putting it all together?
Absolutely. I did write a script at one point and it kind of went the other direction. So I was going through my scrapbooks and my journals and just reading old entries and seeing what I was talking about and writing about. And that was really insightful in terms of, the feeling that a 10-year-old would have and what was in her world at that time and what she cared about. So a lot of it was just trying to get ankles deep in that space again. And for home videos, we actually had like a very limited number, which is crazy because I always felt like my family were always recording like birthdays and things like that. And I actually had to like download some suspicious programs to try to retrieve videos off of our home camera because it was wiped for some reason. So a lot of it was, in my head, but for some reason the physical aspect and the digital aspect wasn't there. So having to work with what we had was something that was a bit of a challenge because, we always live our life and our memories. And sometimes those aspects of, photos, videos aren't there. So having to also recreate that was really fun.
Yeah. Just real quick, I wanted to mention, in case we don't get a chance later, that In Loving Memory has also been nominated for this year's Jury Award for Best Documentary Short. So please, if you're interested in seeing the winners of those awards, the ceremony will be streaming live November 14th at 4 p.m. A very clumsy little interlude, but I think people want to know. Okay, Paolo, I was interested to know. Okay, little preamble, but so your short Night and Day, it sort of uh, it has a very unique approach to sort of telling this story visually. In that, for the most part, we don't see sort of people's faces. Like there's some like silhouettes and profiles and things and like blurred shots and whatnot. But mostly the camera we see focusing on like objects and like taking into account like locations. Can you sort of talk about this thought process behind this and then your approach to shooting the piece?
Yeah. Wow. Like now I'm even thinking about it because it was so far back. But there's that came from a lot of different uh, sources. But the main thing uh, is that um, as I was exploring this film, even in my head, I had actually written it in my head even before I moved back to the Philippines because I knew I wanted to do something like this. The centerpiece of the film on both, like, everything geographically, visually, thematically, is the piano. Every character, well, most of the main ones, they get their time at the piano, and sometimes even it's not even playing the piano, it's a moment that happens by it, but that's really the central setting, but also the central character. And I've always well, at least for a lot of my more recent works, I've really delved more into thinking about uh, the cinematographic approach in terms of a perspective, right? I'm maybe it's a bit of a lack of creativity on my end, but I'm the kind of person, like maybe like a Bresson type, who's like, okay, well, with this particular film, I'm gonna shoot the whole film on like a 50. For this one, I did. I just kept it on one lens. So in that same regard, I wanted the whole film to come from a point of view of a specific character. So I made the piano a character, and it's the piano is like at a certain height, so it wouldn't be able to see faces. So that's the main reason. And then the second reason is when you're talking about the objects. Um, the main human character, I guess, which is revealed at the end of my film, is my mother, and her background is both as like an interior designer and an antique collector, which is why the film is really about um, has this ambient mood all throughout of like giving life to inanimate objects, because that is the kind of space I grew up in, right, in this like family home of ours. So yeah, for me, like with all those combined, it naturally just came out that way.
Yeah, well, I think that definitely comes across, and the sort of ambient setting the mood in that sense, like obviously, like comes through in all of your works. Probably Appa and Paulo more so because of the sort of nature of the shorts. But Appa, I would like to ask, like, given that given the film, my impression is that you are a filmmaker who thinks a lot about like color and like kind of conveying things through it. So I'm guess I'm curious to know how did that play in because of the sort of how did the use of color sort of play into the way that you told the story and the way that you sort of chose to film, edit, what all that.
Okay. Well, like I mentioned earlier, what I wanted the film to be was playing games with grief, and I felt that when we go into crisis, we regress mentally into like the space of a child. So that's why our production design was very like bright and colorful. We had toys everywhere, and um, hmm, it's a good question. I'm trying to think of how else color. I knew I wanted to come in with this very very childlike palette, bright pinks, this very soft baby blue. I sent it to my production designer early on, and we made it work.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess we can start to sort of transition into kind of questions that will apply to everyone. And I want to start by asking. So in my little introduction, I characterized all these works as being experimental, which I don't think is a controversial diagnosis. But I guess my question is, in terms of sort of playing with form, experimenting with form, was that something that you knew you wanted to do before you even knew you wanted to make these films, or was that sort of more a natural result of the ideas which you conceived of? And I guess like building off that, what was the sort of process of like, if that is the case, what was the sort of process of the conception and then realizing exactly how you wanted to mess with form in bringing these ideas to life? And we can start with Vicky, I guess.
Sure. So one thing that I did do when I was writing the script is I was writing in these home videos and still images as well as stop motion, and I kind of had the idea that it would replicate the imagination of a 10-year-old. And when you are in that space, you're kind of like playing with toys and bringing things to life with make-believe and imagination. So I've kind of thought that stop motion would be the best medium. There's a couple other short films I saw that were really inspiring, and I felt like they had the same atmosphere of almost kind of separating you from what is reality, because you're in this world by yourself and living that by yourself and imagining that by yourself. And I never done stop motion before, so I was like, all right, gotta figure out a way to how to do this. But luckily, one of my friends introduced me to our stop motion animator, and she did a wonderful job. And just trying to imagine that for her, because she had to create the doll and the scene by herself over Zoom while we would talk, was really fun, because I had to like really consolidate these details of how to move things or how to kind of animate something that is so close to me and is still close to me. So that was really fun, trying to navigate that with her.
One thing that working on this project really brought up for me was Vicky kind of mentioned this before about talking to your younger self. I never really thought about what it would be like to have a conversation with my younger self, and this kind of working on the film actually brought up when I was younger, we put a time capsule in the ground, and it just made me think of all the things I had written on that and all the different stuff I would have I wanted to say to myself when I had written that, thinking about when I would be older, and then now what I would want to say to myself back then. So after she had explained the context of the story and the use of the videos and the archival footage of her life, I got really interested in it. It took like a day or two for it to settle in and have me understand exactly what she was going for when she was talking about the concept. But after I was able to relate to it in that way, it was a lot different experience.
Okay.
I guess on my end, in terms of form, the way I wanted the film to feel was like the isolation of lockdown. if you all remember, early lockdown, it was a lot of repetition. You slept, you woke up, you did mundane things like did your laundry, you tried to cook, and um, personally, like those 3 months, I can't remember a specific day in that time. Like it's just one large lump of time where all these things happened. I went through cycles of emotional turmoil, and I wanted the film to have that as well. Another thing that we did is we shot the whole film on phone cameras and webcams. And I was quite particular about that because at the time that was the only window into each other's lives. You saw people on Zoom, or you saw um, the pictures that they took on their phones on social media. And inversely, it also felt like the only way to make yourself visible to other people. Otherwise, you would be off the radar. You can't walk into people in the street. Like you have to, if you would like to be perceived, those are your only devices to do that. And actually, the webcam sequences we shot on Zoom because I wanted to play specifically with the background replacement tool of Zoom, sort of see the strange way that it alters reality in real time. So that scene where she's looking out the window and it's an aquarium or it's a forest, we saw that live on set, and I think that really played into I guess the mood of the set. Like we felt that we weren't that it was happening in real time as well.
Your choice of device in this already definitely evokes the lockdown tone, because those are the only cameras. Like right now we're on we're on StreamYard, not Zoom. But wow. For my part, going back to the question on the kind of experimental nature of this, I think it's quite a funny question for me, because the genre divide hadn't occurred to me until the festival submission phase, where it's like, what kind of genre are you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hadn't. It's like because
Experimental. Like
right.
you asked the
So,
question, like
and I had never. Yeah, actually, this is my first experimental. If now that I think about it, or at least like, on as of the Film Freeway records, if you will. But yeah, like for instance, I had written a somewhat of a script, even like the year leading up to filming it, even though I didn't know where the story was gonna go. It was more just almost like a sequence outline of sorts. And then, as mentioned, my film is autobiographical. The characters are my own family members. Um, filmed like 50% candidly, because the film was filmed over 4 weeks, and maybe it wasn't until after week 2 that my family just got used to it. It's like, oh, there's a camera right there. Okay. And so you got some ounces, I guess, of real life in that, as well as some stage sequences. So I guess that's where I played with the form. I've always been uh, fascinated with the blurring, specifically of documentary and fiction. And my very first short film that went to festivals was a short documentary about street dancers in New York. But then I had it heavily like scripted. It was like narrated by one of them, and depicted each subject as kind of like a superhero, because they kind of they are, and not just in their movements, but in the way that in their regular lives you couldn't tell that, oh, that guy is like actually one of the top like poppers in America and stuff like that, but he's a security guard at my university. Anyway, so this is just continuing a pastime for me, which is to play with that in between. And I guess somewhere in that in between, I also ended up overlapping into this experimental checkbox.
Yeah. Yeah. That. That. Yeah. I love that answer. I just so kind of jumping off of some of what you said. Uh, the program is titled "Are We Alone?" and obviously part of that is because these shorts share in common in different ways this idea of getting a glimpse into like either individual or a group of people, like their lives in a way that is not readily apparent necessarily. And I guess I would like to know, how do I put this? So like as in filmmaking, there's often this issue of like grappling with getting access, and especially in documentary filmmaking, which applies to some of you, getting access to these like intimate spaces and intimate lives, or putting part of your own like self out there that isn't necessarily something that people normally see. So I guess can you just sort of talk about like how you feel that applies to your work? Whoever feels like they have an answer can jump in.
I was gonna say that working on the film felt like therapy. Like whenever I would talk to my producer Tony, my cinematographer Sasha, our lead actor Cindy, it was really like traversing some really intense, difficult feelings, and then that led us to sort of sharpening the work, that led us to sort of understand where we were all at emotionally because of the pandemic. And I think it was also a wonderful intimacy on set. Just jumping off something that Vicky said earlier about having to relearn, figure stuff out on your own. We had like a team of 7 or 8 people on set. That was the entire team, and we mounted an entire film in 2 days. Um, and sort of having that intimacy as well, I felt was really productive and really allowed us to explore the emotions of this film.
Yeah, I'll jump off that. In my case, I think it's in terms of access. I think it's pretty obvious. It's me and it's me alone. And actually, that was deliberate. There is a point in which I wanted to bring a cinematographer. I've worked for so long with not just me and count leaning heavily on my cinematographers, art directors, production designers, etc. And one cinematographer option is actually my cousin, and she's a professional cinematographer over here, and she actually would have been great, and she's still a relative. But I feel like that still wouldn't have yielded a lot of the candid nature of what I was referring to earlier, that I caught with the different characters. I will also say that this was by far the most difficult project I've done in terms of that tapping into like what Appa was alluding to. It's one thing. I've spent my early career getting others to open up, and like trying to connect with others, and for me that's the good stuff, and I can do that any day, any time of the day. But in this case, it's myself, and there's a lot of hesitance in that, and especially even down to the to the cutting room, right? So it's actually a mental barrier that you have to break each time. So there were definitely some advantages, but on a creative level, certainly challenges as well.
Yeah, I want to add on to both of you. I had the same like kind of journey. Although it was very, accessible in terms of it's my family right there. It was kind of hard to just break it down because you're so close to these people, but at the same time you're not because I was looking through photos like, oh yeah, my parents had a different life before they had me. So that was really interesting to see their explanations of certain photos, with possibly their exes or their friends. So that was really fun to just dig around. And one thing that I kind of came away from this was just having to put time and space between doing the project as well. Sometimes it would be a little bit overwhelming just trying to find something within all of it. So having that distance was really helpful, and just trying to figure out what I'm also trying to say, because I feel like the process of just understanding your past self is, a lifetime process. So having that, and having also Ryan to be my soundboard of listening to all my babbles and my ideas, was really helpful.
I got a lot out of it being kind of like a hybrid doc. Just I learned a lot about pre-planning, how to format a team online. That was pretty tough. We had like a 20-man crew going for another film, so it was like I'd never done that before. We had never had to communicate so much online and set up a project so much online. So that was actually came out to be a good experience to learn how to do all of that. And the community that we felt, even though we had done it online, was big. And I think that kind of came like full circle. So a lot of the stuff that Vicky was pulling, I think, had a lot to do with community, and had a lot to do with what it meant to be a kid and the values that you have. And she kind of tried to maintain that through the film, and then bring those people back in as well, even though maybe I'm not sure if she had seen a lot of them during the pandemic. So it kind of went full circle.
Now, I do want to ask, since this is an Asian American festival, and we have touched on a lot of themes, but we haven't really touched on the Asianness of any of this. I was wondering, sort of, given that these shorts touch on fairly universal concepts of like home and family, and also isolation on the other hand, and solitude. Um, I'm curious to know if any of you would say that you sort of brought in a specific or unique perspective on these themes because of the culture that you were raised in. And was there any? Would you say there was any of that in these shorts?
Okay, I'll go first this time. For mine, this is a topic that I think I just naturally explore. Like, we're in a medium, or we're our specific stories that the three of us seem to be interested, or are lean towards the personal. So thus, the films we make are mirrors of who we are. And for me, yes, I'm Asian American, I'm Filipino American, even in terms of citizenship. But the kind of I guess the kind of um, upbringing I had was closer to that of what we call like a third culture upbringing, kind of like a very like globalized, uh, liminal realm that's like in between of everything, but which I'm sure all of you here can most certainly relate to. In the case of my film, how that's reflected is I'm one of six kids, uh, all of whom are these third culture kids. And my parents had migrated around the world for a while, so even to the point that different siblings have different citizenships. Grew up either in Canada, the U.S., or in my case, I actually grew up in Manila, even though I was born in the U.S. And again, going back to the narrative of the film, it's very simple. It's the holidays, and for my family, it's really the one time of the year, and sometimes the one time of many years, that we can all be complete, because there's so many of us. Some people have their own families and are in different countries. I think at one point we were spread across, I don't know, 4 continents, maybe a lot of countries. So yeah, I think so. In terms of my film, it carries more of that essence with it.
I want to say that my film is a little bit of a mix. I'm Chinese American, so I feel like a lot of my upbringing is a mix of both, especially because, there's Cantonese in the film, and you kind of see that in the way that my parents and I have a relationship. But also, like with my friends, where we speak English and, I write in English. So that mix was really interesting because it was very obvious that I'm, Asian, but at the same time, I'm living a very American life. So having that juxtaposition is something that is relevant because, as a child, you're not really aware of that until you get older and someone points it out to you. So one thing that I really found intriguing was just also navigating what that's like and showing that even though I am, Chinese, I live a very American life, and those two can mesh together in so many different ways that we're not always aware of, but is still important to identity and how you grow up and how you also identify yourself as you grow up.
I think it's a film about the isolation during the pandemic, and I think what's so interesting. One of the things that's so interesting to me is how um, that was an almost universal experience that cuts across cultures. A lot of us were just like hanging out at home and stuck there and not sure about the state of the world, not sure what was going to happen. But I think that as the pandemic response dredged on, you started to see differences. You started to see vaccine apartheid. You started to see the way that some countries were handling it better, some countries were handling it worse. I think that this is flavored by just how long the lockdown. I don't even know if it's still locked. I think technically we still are under lockdown-ish in the Philippines. It's COVID still plays such a big role in our day-to-day decision making, and this is something that I discuss very often with people in the production industry. Like, what I wasn't expecting to have like life or death calculations like every day. Like, will I get sick if I go here? Should I say no to this project? Should I see this person? Those are the sort of that's the sort of those are the sort of things the things that we still live with now. And I think that the film, while it touches on that experience that we all had, I think it's still flavored by that lingering grief, that lingering uncertainty.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there. Okay. So we're coming on the end of the Q&A. We only have a couple minutes. But just to wrap up, I want to ask all of you, what's next for you, and how can we follow your work? So we can go back to the original lineup and go from Appa and moving clockwise.
You can follow me everywhere at Appa Agbayani. That's Twitter, Instagram, Vimeo, and everything. Currently, I'm writing a feature film for another director. So excited to share that whenever that happens.
All right, just followed. Okay, it's my turn. You can follow me at Pawi Fiction, PAWI Fiction at Twitter, Instagram. I'm mostly on Instagram. That's where I mostly like keep posted on projects. For me personally, I have another feature that I just finished or rather, feature length script that was just completed at a script lab here in the Philippines, and it's currently in development, as well as the previous one that that we never got to, that I alluded to earlier. So that's about two. But for me personally, I'm actually gonna be back stateside. I'm gonna be in New York starting January. So while I'm there, I'm also gonna be exploring, what other kinds of new projects I can get my hands on.
That sounds exciting. Um, I'm on Twitter, not so much, but mainly on Instagram at winterblur, BLURR. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, there's a project that got put on pause, so hopefully we can get that started. Hopefully next year when things are more open up.
Ryan Miller. You can catch me at Composite Character on pretty much all platforms. Yeah, hopefully me and Vicky can work on that project. Hopefully in the spring. I'm pretty excited about that. And I grip and gaff regularly, so just working in the industry, just trying to get into a union or something. But that's everyone's game plan. And I like to write, so I'll just continue writing. And congratulations to everyone for being in the festival. I can't wait to see everyone's work.
Congrats, everyone.
Yep.
Congrats.
Congrats.
Everybody.
So thank you all so much for being here. I encourage everyone, obviously, to check out all this stuff, all this work. If you are interested in purchasing tickets to other programs, you can find those at path.org. And that you can find like our schedule and lineup as well there. So please do that. And yeah, thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.